My name is Chris Wells. I'm the president of Wells Septic Tank Service Manufacturing in Pell City, Alabama. I've been asked to speak for a few moments about the concrete septic tanks. I'm going to try to discuss how they're made, how they evolved over the last 20 years in the state of Alabama, the strength requirements, and how the manufacturing process takes place. I'd like to start with just the process of building a concrete septic tank. We start off generally with a mold, type of selection of mold. There's several different styles of molds. You have a top seam, you have a mid seam tank, and you have some that are poured upside down. You have some that are poured upright, which is what most of our forms are poured upright. We pour from the top side into a two-part form, an inside core and outside core jackets. You start by oiling your mold after you strip the mold originally. Start by oiling the new mold, and you make sure you don't lubricate it too much. If you do, the former lease oil will make the concrete weaker and have dark spots in your concrete. The second thing you want to do is make sure that all your edges are clean, that the mold will close up completely where you won't have segregation of water and sand particles and cement particles coming out the edges of the molds. The next process is your mixing. When you get your inner core back in it and you start your mixing process, you want to have a batch that you're used to using, a concrete mixture that you use on a general everyday use that will be the right consistency. Whether it be, you don't want it too wet because it will segregate and also make your concrete weak. You have a 0.4 water cement ratio that you want to use, which is you want to have 40 pounds of water per 100 pounds of cement. The next thing you want to do is, in the molding process, the placement is very important. You want to drop it at a slow pace to begin with, where it will not rush to the ends and cause it to all go to one spot. You want to drop it all in, let it run underneath our molds. Some are top molds, like I said, but the top forms, we want to let it go underneath it. We vibrate it. That is very important, very crucial. It's a vibration. Make sure you don't have any honeycombs or void spots in your concrete. You have to finish off your concrete with a putty knife or something to that effect to make a smooth edge for a seal to be bonding with your top part, your lid. The other types of concrete forms are a mid-seam that I mentioned. They are poured from the top side, but they're a lot easier to flow, but you have a two-piece tank that you have to put together, and you have a mid-seam, which sometimes people have a problem with them leaking there, is the reason we chose to go with a top seam tank. But some of your larger tanks have to be a mid-seam because of the weight of them. They're too heavy for most of our trucks and other people's trucks to handle without having a large crane on hand. Reinforcement is very crucial to your concrete. You need to check with the fiber companies that you buy from and see what they recommend based on what your state requires to have the compressive strength you need to be able to withstand a small hit to keep it from shattering. We are required to have compression tests. We form 4 compressions a week. We test them in 7 days and 28 days. The state of Alabama requires at least a 3,000 minimum PSI before you can sell a septic tank. In doing so, you're telling folks that you're showing that your tanks are quality enough to be buried and won't cave in as a backfill. It should be with appropriate soil around it. The curing process, as I said, we required 3,000 PSI. So you want to have the concrete ultimate temperature is about 65 degrees to cure, but you want to have it, make sure you're not freezing at night the day of the pour, because it will cause the concrete to crack and not be any good. It will not set up properly. The 28-day cure, even though you can get your strength in less than 28 days, is a good time to be able to test your concrete to make sure that you is reach your optimum strength and it's safe to set that tank. There's different admixtures you can use to get your water cement ratio. We use a water reducer that allows you to put in less water because the water reducer creates a liquid state for the concrete. I think some advantages of the concrete tanks over plastic tanks is the strength and durability. There's a lot less expensive generally, and it lasts a lot longer, and it will take more shock treatment versus a plastic tank, in my opinion. The state of Alabama does require testing for concrete tanks, but the testing on plastic tanks are slightly different because you can't pull a vacuum on a concrete tank, plastic tank, excuse me. You can run a vacuum on a concrete tank. Our concrete tanks are required to have a water leakage test once a year as well. Concrete tanks have evolved in the state of Alabama over the last 20 or 25 years. About in 1977 through 90, when we started making tanks, we were making tanks with a 4-piece lid, which was very cumbersome to set the lids on top of the tanks at the job site. Later in the 80s, late 80s, early 90s, we started using a 2-piece tank lid that was a little easier. And then as time evolved, the state required a 1-piece lid, which allowed us to be able to deliver a tank with a lid in place at the time, which makes it more watertight because you didn't have any seams or joints in the middle of the lid. And after that time, we were required to start using conceal between the lid and the bottom, and then it evolved in later having risers, which I know from my own experience, my own testing, the risers have made the tanks more watertight to make it less sustainability to it didn't allow infiltration from outside water to come in. The last 2 years, we went from using poly seals, a plastic seal, to a rubber boot that meets ASTM standards that requires a clamp to hold the 4-inch pipe inside the boot to keep your pipe from being leaking around the boot. This has been cost a little more, but it makes a better quality tank to allow less leakage. Filters are required in tanks as well in the last 20 years, and that is part of the process we supply with our tanks. Safety is a big issue in our business. We use overhead cranes, trucks, lifting apparatuses to lift our tanks and our hoppers with. So therefore, safety is a big thing because someone can be hurt or killed very easily with a 8,000 or 12,000 pound structure run around them. Again, safety is a big issue at our plant. We try our best to make it safe working. We try to buy the best tools available for our employees. We have remote control overhead cranes. We have remote control trucks to move stuff. We have bought larger forklifts to be able to move the tanks inside and outside the building to make it less hands-on, to be able to allow someone to do their job in a safer method. Also, over the last few years, we have started using safety devices in our risers. It's not required by the state, but I recommend anybody in the manufacturing or installer to use some type of safety net, a safety screen, or a concrete plug in their tanks to make it safer for a child that was to happen to be walking over the tank and the lid not be secure. They would not fall into the tank and die as a result, or have tragic injury as a result of someone not taking all steps necessary to make it safe for the environment and for the public. Generally, you can strip a concrete tank in 24 hours, and if you have a little bit of heat and use the right chemicals in your mixes. Therefore, we are able to strip every day and be able to have enough tanks for our supply for our customers and for the general area that we serve. Compression tests, as I mentioned, we do compression tests on a 7-day and a 28-day. We will also do a 1-day compression test quarterly to make sure we're getting the strength that we need to strip our molds every day. Lifting devices for our tanks. To have a safe moving of our tanks, you want to have the proper lifting devices or lifting apparatuses for your tanks and your lids. You want to have at least a safety factor fudged in for your cables that you use to pick your lids up with, and for your bars you use to lift your tanks up with, as well as the bars you use to move the whole tank itself and transport it on your truck or on the job site. Some of the requirements you need in manufacturing a concrete tank would be an overhead crane, a building. People have an enclosed, some have not enclosed. You need some type of mixer, whether it be a batch plant or a ready mix truck that brings you concrete. You just want to make sure you keep good records to make sure that your tanks are the strength they need to be. You have a consistent mix, and everybody in your shop is trained in the way you would have them to make everything every day in the same manner. And always look for improvements, safety improvements, quality improvements, as well as to try to make it affordable to your customers.